Hi, I'm Chris. This is Finding God at Work. Just a reminder that Finding God at Work isn't just a podcast, it's also an online course. Check it out at findinggodatwork.org. Our current series is Meaningful Work: Calling, Formation, Service, and Love. I want you to think about a time when you did something really excellently. Maybe it was a musical performance after you had practiced for a long time. Maybe passing a test or an exam. Maybe finishing a project at work that you were especially proud of. Or maybe seeing a breakthrough for somebody who you had loved and supported all through some significant challenge. Some moment where you're like, yes, we did it. I did it. Now, if you can, I want you to rewind the tape and go back to the first time you ever started learning to do that. If it was a musical instrument, when was the first time you picked up that instrument? Or maybe the first time you picked up any instrument at all and began to explore how it worked and how it sounded. If it was passing a test, what was it like when you first went to school? Maybe in preschool or kindergarten or first grade. If it was helping a friend, what was it like when that friendship started? How did that person come into your life, and how did you begin to support them? And even before that, how did you become the kind of person who could do that for friends? How did you learn to love people like that? See, whenever we achieve something significant, or we get to be a part of a team achieving something significant, it's this result of something that's years and decades in the making. We've been on this journey our whole lives long to become the kind of people who can do the things that we do. And that can be really easy to forget, because we think about the challenge in terms of what's in front of us right now. We think about the project we've got accomplished this week or even today at work. And we're wrestling with it, and we're thinking about the resources we have and the resources we don't have. And it can be hard to remember, my whole life has led me to the place such that I can do this thing now. And when we think about the idea of calling and what God calls us to do, sometimes we have too narrow of a focus. We can think about, what's the project that's in front of me right now? And that's important, because God does give us work to do right now, today. And we want to be present to that. But if we zoom out, we've got to remember that what God is concerned with is our whole life. Not just every aspect of our life, but the whole story of our life from beginning to end. And God has been at work on us to prepare us in our hearts and our character for the challenges that He's putting before us today. So as we think about calling, how can it help us to see that the small obedience of today, the small way that we answer the call of God today, is connected to this big story of what God is doing in our lives? I want to go to a familiar passage, Matthew 25, and I think this can help us kind of zoom out and see what God's purposes and intentions really are. So this is in a series of parables that Jesus is telling toward the end of his ministry, and he's talking about how people respond to the initiative and the presence of God. Because different people responded to Jesus' ministry in different ways. Some people responded by putting their faith in him and following him, even if they were kind of scared to do so. Other people, like the Pharisees and the chief priests, the other religious leaders, they resisted Jesus. They didn't want to respond to what God was doing. It was hard for them to see what was really happening in Jesus' ministry. So Jesus kind of tells this parable about the different ways that people respond to God. This is Matthew 25, starting in verse 14. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant! You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I scattered no seed? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him, and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Oh, okay. This is a challenging teaching. It ends with that vision of judgment, being cast into the outer darkness, weeping and gnashing of teeth. But what is this parable really about? What is Jesus getting at here? Well, I think it's really important to look at the starting point, the response, and the ending point in order to understand this parable. So what's the starting point? Well, this word talent is used, which is essentially a unit of money. It's a relatively large unit of money. So another translation calls it a bag of gold. It wasn't probably literally a bag, but this isn't just $1 or $10. This is a significant sum that he's entrusting to each of these servants. But he gives different amounts to different servants. So one gets 1, one gets 5, one gets 10. So they start at different points. And that's really significant for us to remember that the servants start at different points. Okay, then what about the response? Well, 2 of the servants, even though they started at different points, they had an identical response. They took the investment that they were entrusted with and they put it to work. They did their darndest with it and they got an excellent return. Pastor Tom Nelson, in his commentary on this passage, says that these are basically like the retirement bankers of antiquity within this parable, because they're taking money and trying to make it grow. And what return do they get? This is getting into the result. They get a 100% return, right? Wow, I wish that my Roth IRA could get a 100% return. That would be pretty amazing. That's better than the annual percentage yield that my guy over at Thrivent Financial is giving me. So they did a really excellent job. They did their darndest, and each of them got an excellent return for the money, even though they started out in very different places. Okay, but let's go back to that middle step, that response. The third, the one who only got 1 talent, he has a very different response. He buries his talent in the ground, and it seems as though he's doing that out of fear. We'll come back to that. And then what's the result? Well, the result is nothing happened with that talent because he buried it in the ground. Okay. Now, how does the master respond? He doesn't respond to the big or small size of the return. He doesn't say, oh, wow, the guy who got 10 talents more, he did the best out of everybody. He doesn't say that. He looks at the quality of the response, bearing in mind that people had different starting places, right? So even though one person earned 5 talents and another earned 10 talents, or got that return of 10 talents, they started in different places. And so what's the master's response? They had the same response, and the master says the same thing to each of them. He says, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. It's the exact same words that he says to each of those servants. But then to the third servant, right? Is he mad because he has less return than the others? No, he's disappointed because he has no return at all. He says, you could have taken what I gave you and at least put it in the bank to get some interest. You didn't even do that. So what he's concerned about is not the result in terms of its size relative to other results, but about the response. What was the response? It was this response of fear and inaction rather than the response of getting to work like the other two had. Okay, so how does this connect to our lives? The word talent can sometimes be misleading because it makes us think about like our natural abilities, like, maybe we're good at playing a musical instrument or speaking Spanish or what have you. And God can use those things too. But really, this refers to anything that God entrusts into our care. Anything that God entrusts to us. So it could be literal resources and money. It can also be our abilities. It can be the specific call that he has on each of our lives, where he's asking us to do something specific, and we have to respond to that invitation and see if we can get to work in that area of our lives. What do we see from this parable? It's that God is not looking at how impressive, how big or small the results of our activities are. He's looking at the quality of our response to his call, to his invitation. He invites us into something, and he's looking, how are we going to respond? And also, what's the result of that response? He says, you have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. So God is also concerned not with absolute return amount, but with growth, with progress. And so this is a parable about ultimate judgment in some ways, but it's also about the cycle of faithfulness in our lives. And this is true just even in quote unquote secular work contexts. Let's say you're running a grocery store and you have somebody who gets hired to sweep the floors at the grocery store. But you notice that they sweep those floors really well. They show up to work on time. They put in a strong effort. They ask for feedback and direction to improve at what they're doing. They sometimes go the extra mile, even doing things that weren't expected of them, but that they know are going to add value in some way. You look at that person, and as a good boss of a grocery store, I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to keep that person sweeping floors forever. We're going to have the best floors ever. No, because now if everybody everywhere was doing excellently and above and beyond at their job, then maybe you'd leave that person sweeping floors because sweeping floors still matters and it counts. But the reality that any boss knows is that it's hard to come by people like that. It's hard to come by people who are going to work hard and give it their all. And so you want to put those people over more responsibility so that things can go even better. So that person's going to get a promotion. Maybe they'll go to the cash register because clearly they're trustworthy. They've shown that character. So he's like, okay, here's how you do the money. Here's how you give people change. Here's how you scan things at the checkout, right? Okay. And then again, you kind of see how do they handle that? If they handle that really well and they have other capacities and propensities for doing other things, maybe they'll get another promotion and so on. This is kind of just the natural order of how progress in work responsibility works, even in a totally secular context. What Jesus is saying is that this is also true spiritually. It's that God gives us an invitation into something, and it's an invitation that's right-sized for us, right? And different ones of us have different sized invitations at different points in our life. So it's not about, is our invitation bigger or smaller than someone else's? It's just, what is God inviting me into in this season? What is God's invitation for me? And can I say yes to it? Can I respond to it? Can I give it my all as much as God gives me grace to do? That's what God's looking for. And when you do that, you actually grow. You mature. You become capable of taking on more responsibility and getting a quote unquote bigger invitation next time around. What are the words that the master uses? Well done, good and faithful servant. Those are character words. Those are describing the heart of the servant. So when you have that heart response of doing your best, giving it your all, you're growing in your capacity to do more with your best and do more with your all over time. And then that's God's intention for you, is to entrust more to you. Now, what that more looks like may vary from person to person. It may not always be a measurable more. It might be a more significant spiritual challenge. Sometimes less is more, right? I think of Kevin Miller, the pastor who I've spoken about a couple times in this series. He used to lead a large team at a large Christian nonprofit. Then he led a smaller team at a large church. Then he led an even smaller team at a smaller church. So his invitation kept getting smaller, quote unquote, in terms of its measurable size. But in terms of the spiritual depth that he was leaning into as he became more and more like Jesus in each of those roles, and the fruit that came out of that, and since I've known him since I was a little kid, I've been able to see that fruit. That was an entrusting more to Kevin and to his wife Karen each of those times. God entrusted more, and he entrusted more, even though it was measurably small. So this maturing, this growing, it may not be impressive in secular or human eyes, but it's the more that God is inviting us into that we want to be ready for. Okay, so again, if we zoom out and we think about our lives as a whole, whatever God is inviting us into today, it may be a small obedience. It may just be doing our job today. It may just be loving our kids today. It may not be anything that's particularly impressive or even worth making a social media post about. And yet, when we step into that invitation to a small obedience, we're putting one more step in this lifelong pathway where God is growing us into the kind of people who can do more and more meaningful and fruitful work in his kingdom. Okay, what's the alternative? The alternative is fear. The alternative is this attitude of the servant who his vision of the master is that the master is somehow devious and unfair. And that's actually really significant, that if we believe that God is not going to do right by us, we will never be able to take risks of obedience. Our obedience flows from our faith and our trust in God's ultimate character of love for us and for the whole world. And so if you're on the cusp of something that you feel like is an invitation from God, a call to obedience, be it big or small, and you have a feeling of fear, the thing to do is to set your face toward Jesus, to look at his face. Because when you see that Jesus is good, that Jesus is faithful, that he is the good and faithful servant, that he will do right by the call of the Father on his life, and he will do right and more by you, that's going to give you the courage you need, the freedom you need to say yes to that invitation. And over time, God makes us into the kind of people who can inherit eternity. Because this parable, as I mentioned, it is about ultimate judgment in some ways. That's why it has that weeping and gnashing of teeth at the end. There's a sense in which this is a description just of how we do our work with God in the here and now. But it's also a description of the ultimate posture of our heart. Is our heart open to God or closed to God for eternity? And if our heart is closed to God, God isn't going to go in there and pry it open against our will. And that's why there is ultimately a place of judgment for those who have refused to participate, refused to answer the invitation of God. A sobering reminder. But for anyone who's willing, to open their heart of their own free will and let God get that open and more open and more open, what we end up inheriting is eternal life. What we end up inheriting is the new heavens and new earth that God is creating. And that's why I love what Dallas Willard says. You guys knew I had to get to another Dallas Willard quote at some point, right? Dallas Willard has a beautiful quote. He says, "The main thing God gets out of your life is not the achievements you accomplish, it's the person you become." The main thing God gets out of your life is not the achievements you accomplish, it's the person you become. God is preparing us to be the kind of people who can inherit eternity. That's why your small obedience today matters. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Give us courage to say yes to your invitation. Thank you that you make us more and more the people who can say yes to more and more of you and your life and your love. Help us remember that invitation comes in little daily pieces. And do your work in us as we do our work with you. Amen.
Thanks for listening. Finding God at Work is a production of Mission Central, a ministry based in Aurora, Illinois, dedicated to forming Christians for mission in everyday life. You can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to this episode to get 10 minutes of teaching on faith and work every Tuesday and Thursday. To get resources to go deeper with each podcast series, read our blog, and get info about upcoming courses on faith in the workplace, go to our website, missioncentral.church.